The city of Chicago in November is a cold, heartless machine. I stood at the corner of 5th and Main, my breath hitching in the frost. At exactly 8:05 a.m., she appeared. She didn't walk, she moved like she owned the sidewalk. Charcoal coat, leather boots, and eyes the color of a midnight storm. She sat on the far end of the bench, ignoring the crowd. I felt a pull, a physical, magnetic tug in my chest that I couldn't explain. Our eyes met for 1 second, and I forgot how to breathe. The bus came. She vanished, but the air around me stayed charged with her electricity. The next morning, I was there early. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. 8:05 a.m. She sat down, closer this time. I could smell her, sandalwood, expensive rain, and a hint of something rebellious. She pulled out a cigarette, but didn't light it. She just held it between her slim fingers, staring at me. "Got a light?" she asked. Her voice was a low, smoky honey that sent a shiver straight down my spine. I handed her my lighter, our skin brushing for a fraction of a second. A literal spark jumped between us. "You're always here," she said, exhaling a cloud of silver smoke, watching the clock, waiting for something. I leaned back, trying to match her cool energy. "Maybe I'm just waiting for the right person to talk to," I replied. She smirked, a dangerous, beautiful curve of her lips. "5 minutes, Julian. That's all the world gives us before the bus tears us apart. Make them count." My name on her tongue sounded like a secret. I realized then that this wasn't just a commute, it was a game, and I was already losing. It was pouring rain on Thursday. The shelter was cramped, forcing us to stand shoulder to shoulder. I could feel the heat radiating from her body. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy, thick with the things we weren't saying. She leaned in, her lips inches from my ear. "If I told you to skip your bus today, would you?" The temptation was a physical weight. I looked at her, the rain dripping off her lashes, and for a moment the entire city disappeared. Only her pulse, visible at the base of her throat, mattered. Friday morning. She was leaning against the glass, looking exhausted but radiant. I reached out, my fingers tracing the line of her jawline before I could stop myself. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering shut. "You're dangerous," she whispered. "No," I countered, my thumb brushing her lower lip. "You're the one who started this." The bus hissed to a stop, the doors opening like a final warning. She stepped on, but as she did, she pressed a small, cold object into my palm. I opened my hand to find a silver key with a leather tag. No address, no note, just the key. My mind went into overdrive. Was this an invitation or a test? I spent the weekend haunting the streets, looking for a door that matched the weight in my pocket. Every woman I saw was a shadow of her. The obsession was taking root, turning the 8:05 a.m. encounter into the only thing that made me feel alive. Monday. I grabbed her arm the moment she stepped onto the curb. "The key, Clara. What is it for?" She didn't flinch. She just looked at me with those midnight eyes, a challenge written in every line of her face. "It's for the life you're too afraid to lead," she said. She leaned in, her chest pressing against mine, the tension between us snapping like a live wire. "If you want to know more, you have to prove you're not just a man who waits for a bus." A black SUV pulled up behind the bus stop. A man in a dark suit stepped out, his eyes fixed on Clara with a possessive intensity. I saw her grip her bag tighter, her knuckles turning white. "I have to go," she whispered, her bravado suddenly replaced by a sharp, cold fear. She didn't board the bus. She walked toward the car. I stood there, helpless, watching the woman who had set my soul on fire disappear into a world I didn't understand. I didn't go to work. I followed the SUV. My heart was racing, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. They pulled up to a high-rise luxury building, the kind of place where money buys silence. I looked at the silver key in my hand. It felt heavy, like a weapon. I walked into the lobby, the gold-plated doors closing behind me. I wasn't just Julian from the bus stop anymore. I was a man on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump. The key fit the lock of Penthouse B. I pushed the door open to find a room filled with nothing but canvases. And in the center of the room, Clara stood in a red dress, her back to me. She didn't turn around. "I knew you'd come, Julian," her voice echoing in the empty space. "But once you enter this room, the 5-minute rule is dead. There's no going back to your quiet life." I walked toward her, my shadow falling over hers. "I don't want a quiet life. I want you." The penthouse smelled of linseed oil and expensive bourbon. Clara turned around, her eyes scanning me with a hunger that made the room feel small. She pointed to a massive canvas covered in a sheet. With a swift motion, she pulled it down. It was a portrait of me, but not the me I saw in the mirror. It was raw, dark, and filled with a desperate longing. "This is how I see you at 8:05 a.m., she whispered, stepping into my personal space. I reached out, my hand resting on her waist. The silk of her dress felt like liquid fire under my palms. The heavy thud of the penthouse door echoing through the hallway broke our trance. Clara froze, her face turning pale. "He's early," she hissed. Before I could ask who, a man walked in, the same man from the black SUV. He was older, polished, and carried an aura of cold authority. "Victor," Clara said, her voice tight. Victor looked at me, then at the portrait, a slow, mocking smile spreading across his face. "So, this is the inspiration you've been hiding on a bus stop bench?" Victor wasn't just a collector. He was the man who owned the building, the gallery, and, as I soon realized, Clara's career. He walked over to me, his eyes cold as ice. "She has a talent for finding beauty in the mundane," he said, flicking a speck of dust off my lapel. "But don't mistake a muse for a partner, Julian. You're a hobby. I'm her reality." Clara stood between us, her hand trembling as she gripped her paintbrush like a dagger. The air was thick with a silent, violent competition. After Victor left with a warning to stay in my lane, Clara collapsed into a chair. "He paid for my father's surgery years ago," she confessed, her voice breaking. "Now, I'm his golden goose. I paint what he wants, I go where he says." I knelt in front of her, taking her hands in mine. "Not tonight," I said. We didn't take the elevator. We ran down 20 flights of stairs, laughing breathlessly like teenagers, escaping into the neon-lit maze of the city. For one night, the debt didn't exist. We ended up on the roof of a crumbling warehouse, the city skyline shimmering like a crown below us. The wind whipped her hair across her face. I pulled her against me, my leather jacket acting as a shield against the cold. She looked up at me, her lips parted. "Why did you follow me?" she asked. I didn't answer with words. I leaned down and kissed her, a deep, possessive kiss that claimed everything she was. Her response was a desperate gasp, her arms locking around my neck as if I were the only thing keeping her from falling. "Come with me," I whispered against her skin. "Leave the gallery. Leave Victor. We can go anywhere." Clara pulled back, her eyes filled with a tragic sort of love. "He'll ruin you, Julian. He has enough power to make you disappear from this city." I gripped her shoulders, my gaze unwavering. "Let him try. I'd rather be ruined with you than safe without you." The intensity in my voice seemed to shock her, but it also lit a fire in her eyes that Victor could never extinguish. The next morning, I arrived at my office to find my computer locked and a pink slip on my desk. Victor had moved fast. I was fired, blacklisted from every firm in Chicago. I walked out with my head high, headed straight for the 8:05 a.m. bus stop. She was there, waiting. She saw the look on my face and knew. She didn't say she was sorry. She walked up to me in front of everyone and kissed me, a bold, defiant act that told the world she had made her choice.
With no jobs and no gallery, we went underground. Clara started painting in a basement studio, hidden away from Victor's reach. The work was different now, violent, passionate, and beautiful. I became her protector, her manager, and her lover. We lived on coffee and adrenaline. The 5-minute rule was replaced by 24 hours of intoxicating intensity. We were poor, we were hunted, but we were finally free. A messenger arrived at the basement with a manila envelope. Inside were photos of us from the rooftop and a legal document claiming ownership of every canvas Clara had painted in the last month. Victor was suing for breach of contract. If he won, he would take everything she had created. Clara looked at the canvases, our life's work, and then at me. "I won't let him have them," she said, her voice turning cold and hard. That night, we didn't run. We loaded the canvases into my old truck, but as we turned the key, we saw the orange glow in the rearview mirror. The basement studio was in flames. Victor's men had found us. I grabbed Clara, pulling her back as the windows shattered from the heat. Everything was gone. We stood on the sidewalk, the smoke stinging our eyes, watching our past burn. Clara turned to me, her face smeared with soot, her eyes blazing. "Now," she said, "we have nothing left to lose. Let's burn his world down too."
The fire reflected in Clara's eyes, turning the midnight blue into a molten gold. We stood there, smelling of smoke and heartbreak, but we weren't crying. I took her hand, her skin rough with soot, and kissed her knuckles. "He thinks he destroyed your art," I whispered, my voice thick with a new kind of hunger. "But he forgot that you are the masterpiece." We didn't call the police. We turned our backs on the flames and walked into the shadows, a plan already igniting in our minds. Victor was hosting the Gala of the Century at his private estate to celebrate his new collection, the ones he stole from Clara. We spent our last few dollars on a tuxedo for me and a backless black silk dress for her. As we stepped out of the taxi, the paparazzi went wild. We weren't the bus stop couple anymore. We were the storm. Clara leaned into me, her lips brushing my jaw. "Tonight, Julian, we take it all back." Inside the gala, the air was suffocating with wealth. Victor saw us and his glass of wine nearly shattered in his hand. I walked straight up to him, my hand firmly on Clara's waist, staking my claim in front of the city's elite. "You missed a spot, Victor," I said, leaning in so only he could hear. "The sketches you burned? They were just copies. The originals are already being uploaded to every major art blog in the world right now." It was a lie, but the fear in his eyes was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. While the crowd was distracted by a technical glitch I had arranged with a hired hacker, Clara and I slipped into Victor's private study. Behind a painting of a cold gray landscape was a digital vault. Clara remembered the code. It was the date of her father's surgery, the day Victor had bought her. We opened it to find not just her contracts, but the proof of Victor's years of money laundering through the art world. "We have him, Clara?" Clara's chest heaving with excitement. Suddenly, the lights in the study flickered and died. We heard footsteps. Victor stood in the doorway, a small silver pistol in his hand. "You should have stayed on your bench, Julian," he hissed. I stepped in front of Clara, my body a shield. But Clara didn't hide. She stepped out, her hand resting on my heart. "You can kill us, Victor," she said, her voice steady and lethal. "But you can't kill the 805. It's already everywhere." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. The hacker had done his job. The police swarmed the estate. Victor was led away in handcuffs, his polished mask finally cracking into 1,000 pieces. As the cameras flashed, he looked at us, two people who had nothing but each other, and saw his own defeat. We stood on the marble staircase, the cool night air hitting our faces. The debt was gone, the shadow was lifted. Clara turned to me, her eyes wet with tears of relief. "It's over, Julian, truly over." We didn't wait for the morning. We drove to a small hidden hotel by the coast. The room was candlelit, the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs below. I pulled the pins from Clara's hair, letting the dark waves fall over her shoulders. "I lost my job, my apartment, and my safety for you," I whispered, trailing my fingers down the curve of her spine. She turned in my arms, her lips burning with an intensity that made the room feel like it was on fire. "And I found my soul in you," she replied. The night was a blur of silk sheets and whispered promises. There were no more 5-minute limits. We had the whole night, the whole year, the whole life. Every touch was a silent thank you, every kiss a forever. I looked at her in the moonlight, her skin glowing like pearls. "I used to hate the morning," I confessed, pulling her closer. "Now I can't wait for it to start, as long as you're the first thing I see." The sun rose over the water, painting the room in shades of pink and orange, the same pink light Isabella had seen all those years ago. We weren't at a bus stop, we were on a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean. Clara sat at an easel, a fresh canvas in front of her. She looked at her watch, 8:05 a.m. She didn't pick up a brush. She walked over to me, sat on my lap, and pressed her forehead against mine. "The rule has changed," she whispered. I pulled a small velvet box from my pocket. No more silver pens, no more keys. Inside was a ring that shimmered like the morning dew on a city bench. I didn't need to ask. She didn't need to answer. I slipped it on her finger, and as the world woke up around us, I realized that some stories don't end. They just evolve. We were no longer two strangers waiting for a bus to take us to separate lives. We were one soul in one life, and our 5 minutes had finally